Camp 66, Southern England, summer 1946. The war was technically over, but for Anna Richter, a former German signals auxiliary from Dresden, the terror had only intensified. At 22, she was an official prisoner of war. Yet her biggest fear wasn't the mud, the boredom, or the barbed wire. Her fear was wrapped in a flimsy cotton blanket and pressed against her ribs, her 5-month-old daughter, Liesel. In the chaos of the final days, Liesel was all that remained of her life. She was also a secret that could mean their double execution. The British guards were not monsters. In fact, they were generally tired, often kind, and sometimes even shared a rare cigarette. But Anna had survived on the front lines, and she knew the cold, hard logic of war. Babies, particularly enemy babies, were liabilities. They needed food, milk, and warmth, resources that a prison camp simply did not have. Worse, Anna had been indoctrinated by years of Nazi propaganda, which depicted the Allies as barbaric, baby-killing demons who would use any excuse for reprisal. Her mother's last words to her had been, "They hate us, Anna. They hate our blood." The hiding place was an art of desperation. Liesel was small for her age, a miracle of undernourishment. Anna kept her swaddled and silent inside the thickest blanket she possessed, tied tightly to her abdomen beneath her uniform tunic. When the camp lights went out, she moved her to the space between the mattresses of her bunk, covering the opening with her own body. For 5 months, the baby had not cried louder than a kitten's sneeze. Anna's deepest fear was the inspection, and then, the day came. A chill ran down the spine of the entire barracks when Sergeant Thompson, a tall, gaunt man with a reputation for being thorough, entered with 2 subordinates. "Full inspection," he barked. "Beds stripped, lockers emptied, 1 line, now." This was not routine. Thompson had heard rumors of contraband, perhaps jewelry, perhaps smuggled alcohol. His eyes, however, swept the room with military precision, missing nothing. As the women nervously began stripping their beds, Anna moved with a dangerous calm. She carefully slid Liesel, blanket and all, into the bottom of her locker, covering her with her only wool sweater, then tossing a pile of dirty laundry on top. Anna stood rigid, her breath shallow. Thompson began his sweep. The guards were efficient, methodical. They flipped mattresses, probed the straw stuffing, and shook out blankets. When Thompson reached Anna's spot, he paused. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the small, loose knot on the corner of her blanket, a knot she used to identify her blanket in the dark. It was the slightest deviation from the standard, a tiny personal sign. His eyes then moved to her locker. He knelt, pulling out the pile of dirty, musty laundry. The sweater was next. Thompson hesitated for a moment, then pulled out the thick wool sweater. It was the last layer, the last shield. He held the sweater in one hand, ready to toss it aside. Liesel was directly underneath, perfectly silent, breathing the stale air trapped beneath the wool. Anna felt her knees buckle. She didn't pray to God. She prayed to Liesel, silently begging her to remain motionless, to not make a sound, to not betray them both. She was ready to confess, to scream, anything to make him stop. But before she could move, Thompson froze. He was staring at the bottom of the locker. He didn't see the blanket. He saw a small, perfectly carved wooden bird, a dove, a crude yet beautiful piece of folk art. Liesel's father had carved it for her while on leave, before he was reported missing near the Oder. Thompson slowly reached into the locker, not with a grabbing motion, but a gentle one. He picked up the dove, turning it over in his large, calloused fingers. The act took 5 seconds. 5 seconds of total silence where the fate of 2 lives hung in the balance. Anna's world dissolved into the beat of her own frantic heart. Thompson dropped the bird back into the locker. He didn't say a word. He didn't even glance at Anna. He simply stood up and moved to the next bed. "Carry on," he barked to his men. The inspection continued, the search methodically moving down the line, but the crisis was over. The soft wooden dove, a symbol of peace and love, had somehow been more convincing than the tightly swaddled human being beneath it. Liesel remained silent. Anna's legs almost gave out. She had been reprieved. Not by the guard's mercy, but by a simple, inanimate object that reminded a weary soldier of home or perhaps of his own children. The relief of surviving the inspection was short-lived. While Sergeant Thompson's passing glance had been a miracle, the reality of Camp 66 was a relentless war against nature. Anna's diet consisted of watery soup, dry bread, and tea made from burnt barley. Her body, already depleted by years on the Eastern Front and the trauma of capture, had begun to shut down the luxury of milk production. Liesel, small as she was growing, demanding more than Anna could possibly give. The baby's cries, though still muffled, started to become more frequent and more desperate. Her tiny body felt increasingly fragile against Anna's chest. A slow, creeping sickness began to take hold. Liesel developed a persistent, rattling cough. Her skin, already pale, took on a sickly gray tint. Anna, a girl who had fixed faulty field radios under artillery fire, now faced a problem she couldn't fix with logic or a soldering iron. She felt utterly helpless. Her resources were non-existent. She couldn't ask the camp medical staff, knowing that the discovery of the baby would instantly trigger the report she had desperately avoided. Every cough was a potential death knell, a siren that could summon the guards. The barracks were a symphony of misery, but misery had its own acoustics. The routine sounds, the scraping of shoes, the whispered complaints, the rustle of straw masked a lot, but they didn't mask everything. That night, Liesel had a coughing fit so violent it pulled her out of the deep sleep Anna had managed to lull her into. It wasn't a cough, it was a choking, desperate gasp. Anna covered the baby with both hands, pressing her face into the blanket, trying to absorb the sound with her own body. A muffled cry escaped the padding. A voice cut through the darkness. It was not a man's voice, not a guard. It was Maria, a hardened, cynical woman in her late 30s, who slept in the bunk next to Anna. Maria was a veteran of the Luftwaffe ground crew, known for her sharp tongue and her utter lack of sentimentality. She hadn't spoken more than 10 words to Anna in the past month. "What was that, Richter?" Maria hissed, sitting up with a sudden jerky movement. "Sounded like a damn cat. We have enough rats in here without bringing in strays." Anna's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the baby's head. The moment of truth had come, but from the inside, from her own people. Betrayal within the camp was often crueler than the enemy's punishment. Informants existed. A baby was a prize for a guard looking for a promotion or an easy report. Anna slowly turned her head, looking up at Maria's silhouetted profile. Her voice was barely a croak. "Nothing, Maria. Just a cough. I have a bad chest." Maria didn't move for a long time. She just stared, her face a dark, unreadable mask. Then she slowly lowered herself back down onto her straw mattress, the rustling sound filling the silence. Anna sighed internally, her muscles relaxing for a fraction of a second. But Maria was not finished. "That was not a cough, Anna," she whispered, her voice low and dangerously calm. "And it was not a cat." She shifted, bringing her face close to the edge of Anna's bunk. "You are hiding something, and if it brings the guards down on this barracks, I will tell them myself what it is." Anna knew she had no choice. Survival depended on trust, and trust was the most expensive commodity in Camp 66. Liesel began to whimper again, a small, weak sound. Anna reached into the blanket, pulled out the child slightly, and held her towards Maria, exposing the tiny, sickly face. Maria inhaled sharply. Her eyes, used to the grime and hardness of war, were suddenly confronted with pure, defenseless infancy. "Gott im Himmel," Maria breathed, her cynicism momentarily shattered. A baby. The hard shell of the veteran cracked. Maria didn't ask about the father, the circumstances, or the insane risk. She saw only the gray skin and the desperate look in Anna's eyes. "She's sick, isn't she?" Maria whispered. Anna could only nod, tears silently tracing paths through the dirt on her cheeks. Maria suddenly moved with the same decisive speed she used to fix a tank engine. She reached under her own pillow, pulling out a small, tightly wrapped cloth packet. "It's my reserve," she muttered. "Cigarettes. I trade them for everything, but she needs it more." Maria unwrapped the packet, revealing a piece of dry, processed cheese and a half loaf of stale black bread, contraband food, hoarded for weeks. "We need to get her food and warmth, and if you ask the British, they will take her. Or worse, a secret shared is a burden halved." Anna was no longer alone. The weight of the world had shifted from her shoulders to two. But the fundamental problem remained. How do you feed a 5-month-old infant on black market cheese and stale bread? Liesl needed milk. Real milk. And the only place to get it was outside the wire, from the enemy who controlled their very lives. Maria looked at Anna, a new determination in her eyes. We need a plan, Anna. And we need to move fast. She won't last another week on your rations. Maria's desperate plan was simple: bribery. The barracks guards, low-ranking privates and corporals, often looked the other way for a pack of cigarettes or a piece of traded chocolate. Maria approached Private Collins, the youngest guard on the night shift, known for his soft eyes and his homesickness. She offered him her entire stash: the cheese, the stale bread, and a small gold locket, the last piece of jewelry she possessed, in exchange for powdered milk from the mess hall. Collins looked at the meager pile of contraband, then at the formidable barracks fence, then back at Maria. "I can't, Maria," Collins whispered, his face pale. "They inspect the rations weekly. If they find one tin missing, it's court-martial. For a German prisoner? For contraband. I'll be in the stockade before morning." He pushed the locket back into her palm. The risk was too high. The supply chain was too controlled. Anna and Maria had asked the system for a loophole, and the system had firmly refused. Liesl's only source of sustenance was officially, irrevocably cut off. That night, Liesl's fever spiked. She was no longer coughing. She was struggling to breathe, the rattling sound in her chest raw and terrifying. Anna held her, rocking her gently, singing old, meaningless German lullabies that felt like a mockery against the severity of the illness. She pressed her face into the blankets, trying to shield the sound, but the sound was already too big for the confines of the bunk. It was no longer a muffled cry. It was a persistent, high-pitched scream of pain, echoing the terror of 5 months of suppressed existence. The sound cut through the Camp 66 routine like glass. The other women in the barracks woke instantly, sitting bolt upright. They looked at Anna's bunk with horrified dread. They had been sleeping on a time bomb, and it had just detonated. Maria jumped up, running toward the door, not to betray Anna, but to desperately try and listen if the sound had carried outside the wooden walls. She returned, her eyes wide. "They heard it, Anna. They heard it." The women scrambled to hide the blankets, to pretend they were asleep, but the scream persisted, a painful, shrill accusation against the war itself. A minute later, the footsteps arrived. Not the heavy tread of the low-ranking guards, but a measured, sharp rhythm that only authority figures possessed. 2 sets of footsteps stopped outside Barrack 4. A decisive, firm knock echoed through the room. It was not a violent boot kick. It was the knock of command. Then, the voice. "Richter, Auxiliary Richter, open this door immediately." It was Major Henderson, the camp commandant himself, the man responsible for their lives, their death, and the paperwork. Anna's blood turned to ice. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. Liesl was screaming now, a desperate, animalistic sound that defied all concealment. Major Henderson didn't wait. The door swung open, not gently, but with a deliberate, smooth movement that carried immense authority. Henderson stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette imposing against the dim external camp light. He was holding a flashlight. He swept the beam across the room, past the frozen, terrified women, past Maria, and fixed it, with terrifying finality, on Anna's bunk. Henderson took 1 step inside. He didn't need to ask. The sound was too obvious. The smell of fear was too strong. He simply looked down at Anna, who was curled around the tiny, screaming bundle, her face contorted in total despair. Anna knew this was the end of the line. She had nothing left to hide, no more lies to tell. She slowly lifted the blanket, exposing the small, red, struggling face of Liesl. Anna looked up at the major, not with defiance, but with a desperate, animalistic plea. She braced herself for the shout, the accusation of contraband, the inevitable order for her and the baby's removal and execution. Major Henderson didn't shout. He did something far more devastating. He closed the barrack door with a quiet, decisive click, cutting off the terrified witnesses and the cold night air. The action instantly shifted the scene from a public confrontation to a private moral crucible. He lowered his flashlight, and the beam settled on Liesel. The major knelt beside the bunk. The large man, whose uniform represented the entire military might that had crushed the Reich, was now face to face with the war's most fragile, most inconvenient victim. He reached out a gloved finger and gently touched the infant's forehead. "This is beyond my jurisdiction, Fräulein Richter," he stated, his voice low and professional, betraying no emotion. "But the child has a fever, and my orders, above all, are to prevent death where it can be prevented." He stood up, turning his back on Anna, and walked quickly to the barracks phone, a line strictly for official military business. He didn't call the military police. He didn't call his superior officer. He called the camp medical hut. "Dr. Fraser," he barked into the receiver. "Urgent, off-the-books medical situation in Barrack 4. Contagious risk is low, but the patient is critical. Bring antibiotics and fever suppressants, now." Dr. Fraser arrived 5 minutes later. Proton the Scotsman, bundled in his coat and carrying his medical bag, ignored the frozen POWs lining the walls. He went straight to Liesel. He worked quickly under the major's steady flashlight beam, his movements efficient and utterly professional. He diagnosed severe respiratory infection and malnutrition. He administered a small injection of penicillin, the miracle drug that had been practically non-existent in German field hospitals. He stabilized the fever with a cold compress and prescribed constant, immediate milk feeding. "She needs warmth, Major," Fraser stated, "and high-fat milk, immediately. If we wait until morning rations, she might not make it." The milk was the ultimate currency of the war. Officially, Major Henderson could not use camp rations for a civilian baby whose presence violated every protocol, but the major did not ask the system for permission. He walked swiftly out of the barracks and returned 2 minutes later. He wasn't carrying a court-martial summons. He was carrying a dented tin of sweetened condensed milk, a part of his personal, imported officer's ration, hoarded away for emergencies. He handed it to Dr. Fraser, along with his own heavy-duty blanket. "Give her everything in that tin," Henderson commanded, "and keep the child warm." The major was risking his career, his rank, and potentially a reprimand for a child he was officially ordered to view as a liability. Anna watched, paralyzed. The major's action shattered her reality more profoundly than any physical abuse could have. Abuse would have confirmed the propaganda. Abuse would have made sense. But this precise, selfless, risk-laden act of mercy was illogical. It was chaos. It meant everything she believed about the enemy was a lie. The men she had been taught were baby killers, were risking their careers to save her child with contraband milk. She saw the truth then. Henderson wasn't acting as a British major. He was acting as a man, overriding military necessity with human conscience. She buried her face in the blanket, the tears finally flowing, not the hot, terrified tears of fear, but the slow, agonizing tears of shame and gratitude. The major stood by the bed, ignoring the other women. He didn't need their gratitude. He didn't need their fear. He needed order. "Dr. Fraser will monitor the child every 3 hours, he commanded quietly. "This matter is now a confidential medical case, under my direct authority. No one leaves this barracks until morning. No one speaks of this." His eyes swept the room, meeting the gaze of every terrified woman. He wasn't threatening them. He was giving them a chance to share the secret, and in doing so, share the risk. The women nodded, their fear replaced by a strange, shared protectiveness over the tiny, struggling life. The secret of Liesel was now the secret of Barrack 4. Liesel's rescue created a fragile, silent alliance. The women of Barrack 4, who had previously only communicated in whispers of complaint or gossip, now shared a purpose. Maria became the chief logistics officer. She organized a rotational system. One woman was always awake, listening for the major's measured footsteps. Another was responsible for keeping the major's blanket clean and dry, and a third, often Anna herself, kept the temperature constant. They used their meager candle stubs to boil the major's condensed milk with smuggled water over a carefully hidden improvised stove, a repurposed tin can. The barracks stopped being a prison and became, for the first time, a home. Major Henderson's visits became routine, but never less tense. He would arrive after nightfall, always alone, always with a tin of milk or a piece of medical supplies he had personally acquired. He never entered the room completely. He stood by the threshold, allowing Dr. Fraser to check the infant. His involvement was a massive risk, one he kept deeply hidden from his subordinates, especially Sergeant Thompson, the one who conducted the failed inspection. Yet the Major's commitment was absolute. He had chosen the child's life over military protocol, and he would not back down. Liesel's presence started to ripple outward. One day, Anna was granted permission to leave the barracks for laundry detail, a simple job with minimal supervision. As she hung a tiny hand-washed flannel diaper made from a repurposed uniform sleeve on the line, a young British private walked past. Private Miller, who had only ever seen the POWs as interchangeable figures in gray uniforms, stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the minuscule garment, then at Anna's gaunt, exhausted face. He hadn't seen anything so purely civilian, so undeniably innocent, since he left England. "What is that?" he asked, his German halting. Anna froze, expecting punishment for a non-regulation item. "It is a cleaning cloth, Private," she lied automatically. Miller didn't believe her. He saw the shape, the purpose, and the meticulous stitching. He understood instantly. A child, an enemy child, hidden right here. His immediate reaction wasn't to report. It was a visceral, human connection to the life he had fought to protect back home. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked away, his pace heavy. The secret was safe. The Major's silence had created a moral field around the baby, one that the average soldier was now choosing to respect. The atmosphere in Barrack 4 changed permanently. The women, united by their shared protectiveness over Liesel, began to find small ways to share their limited resources, a collective effort of motherhood. Maria continued to be the most active, trading portions of her bread for extra, slightly cleaner straw to make the baby's bed softer. Other women knitted tiny garments from unraveled sock threads. Liesel became the barrack's unspoken mascot, a symbol of future, and proof that their bodies and their lives still held value beyond the uniform. She was a silent reminder that the brutality of war had a shelf life, but a new life, regardless of nationality, always represented a beginning. 3 weeks later, Major Henderson came on his final routine visit. Liesel's fever was gone. She was still tiny, but her skin had lost the gray tint, replaced by the pale pink of a healthy baby. Dr. Fraser confirmed her stability. The danger was over. The Major stood by the door, and Anna, for the first time, did not tremble. She looked at him, the man who had the power to destroy her, but chose to save her, with quiet reverence. Henderson nodded to the women, a slight, almost imperceptible gesture of thanks for their cooperation. He had successfully performed the ultimate act of wartime humanity. He had smuggled a life through the system. The bureaucracy of peace was slow, but inevitable. Repatriation documents arrived for Anna Richter in late 1946. Major Henderson ensured her file was meticulously prepared and slightly altered. Liesel's birth was recorded not as having occurred in Camp 66, but in a distant, disorganized displaced persons camp outside British jurisdiction. This was the final, critical risk. Liesel was now officially a civilian, undocumented by the camp, securing Anna's protection from further inquiry. Henderson handled the papers himself, his pen scratching against the official forms, forging a new, safer reality for the child. The morning of departure was quiet. The women of Barrack 4 stood silently around Anna's bunk. Maria embraced her with the fierce, wordless intensity of a soldier who has shared a bunker under fire. "Write to me," Maria commanded, tucking a small, tightly rolled cigarette into Liesel's blanket. "Tell me she is well." The parting was not one of celebration, but of shared knowledge and responsibility. They had protected a life together. That bond transcended the barbed wire. Anna's final stop was Henderson's office. He was behind his desk, looking impossibly distant. The Major once more, not the man who knelt. He handed her the sealed repatriation documents. Anna looked at the papers, then at him. Words felt insufficient. She placed her daughter's tiny hand on the desk, a silent, profound gesture of thanks. Henderson did not flinch. He reached into his drawer, pulling out a final unopened tin of sweetened condensed milk, the expensive high-fat kind. He pressed it into Anna's hand. "Survival," he said, meeting her eyes. That's the only order that matters now. Go. Anna and Liesel crossed the German border a week later. They were free. Liesel grew up in a rebuilt Munich, knowing nothing of the damp wool blankets, the fear-tinged milk, or the kindness of Major Henderson. Anna never told her daughter the full truth of her birth. Liesel only knew she was a miracle child, and she knew one other thing. Her mother kept a dented, old tin of milk in her kitchen cabinet, never opening it. It was her most sacred, most guarded possession. The truth about the German POWs is complex. Propaganda promised them death and torture. But the system of the Allied forces, driven by adherence to the Geneva Convention and by the moral choices of men like Major Henderson, offered them life. Liesel was a testament to that choice. She was a life smuggled through the system, a tiny human argument against the entire edifice of hatred. The Major, the doctor, Maria, and the women of Barrack 4 all risked punishment to protect innocence. In the coldest winter of the war, they proved that humanity is a choice that can be made, even when every military order suggests otherwise. Liesel's life was bought with risk and a tin of milk. If this story of smuggled mercy resonated with you, if it challenged your view of wartime cruelty and the power of individual conscience, hit that subscribe button. We are dedicated to uncovering the impossible moments where the enemy chose to see the person. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the greatest strength is not in the violence we inflict, but in the mercy we withhold. Thank you for watching.